Hamburg als Profiteur deutscher Kolonialgeschichte, heute in Namibia. Und ich begrüße als erstes ganz herzlich die Panelistinnen, mit ihnen zusammen das Panel zu bestreiten, und die Delegation, aber auch ein herzliches Hallo an alle, die da sind. Ich werde jetzt, weil das Panel auf Deutsch angekündigt war, auf Deutsch sprechen. Insgesamt hat sich aber einiges verändert, das heißt, ich werde gleich auf Englisch weitermachen. Und genau, ich habe als ersten Satz sozusagen, bevor ich Ihnen eine Vorstellung der Panelistinnen gehe, den Hinweis, dass sich einiges sehr spontan an dem Panel geändert hat, vor allem in der Besetzung. Wir waren eigentlich 4 Personen. Leider ist der Frühling noch nicht so ganz angekommen und damit werden Menschen doch auch noch mal krank. Deswegen vermissen wir leider sowohl Herrn Jan Kavelat als auch noch Herrn Schwarze. Und das ist natürlich sozusagen erstmal sehr schade, weil sie sich vorbereitet haben und gerne hier gewesen wären. Das war aber jetzt vor allem auch eine Herausforderung für die Teilnehmenden und insbesondere für Dr. Murangi, der sehr spontan eingesprungen ist, und ich bin sehr dankbar, dass er vom nächsten Panel sozusagen sich bereit erklärt hat, hierher zu kommen, und dafür vielleicht erstmal noch einen kleinen Applaus. Genau, damit würde ich Sie auch bitten, etwas nachsichtig darin zu sein, dass bestimmte Schwerpunkte sozusagen, die eigentlich nicht angekündigt waren, heute dann nicht in der gleichen Form bearbeitet werden. Ich bin sehr sicher und zuversichtlich, dass wir trotzdem eine spannende Diskussion haben werden, weil die Expertinnen trotzdem hier sitzen haben, aber der Schwerpunkt verlagert sich dann ein bisschen. Wir müssen uns sozusagen auch ein bisschen ad hoc organisieren und genau, ich denke aber mit Ihrer Unterstützung funktioniert das gut. Genau, dann habe ich schon gesagt, zur Begrüßung erst einmal ganz herzliches Hallo und danke nochmal, a very warm welcome to you also, Dr. Murangi. I will not be introducing the panelists in detail because we had the sudden switches, and I will just let you know what he told me as well. He is co-founder and director of the Herero and Nama Genocides Institute and currently residing in the USA. And working on the subjects that will also be addressed here in the panel. And he also let me know that he's one of the important things in his life, a father of 3 daughters. And this isn't the first, but already the second visit to Hamburg. And I would like to give you a word for a short introduction of yourself before I welcome the other panelists.
Thank you very much. Good morning, and thank you very much for Hamburg, for our friends, the young people and colleagues who organized this event. Just by way of introduction, I would like to say that I'm a father of 3 daughters, out of who I am as a person, as a human being. I have a unique connection with the city of Hamburg, which I am discovering. In fact, I just discovered this last couple of days that General Franke, who was operational in Namibia, committed atrocities, including the rape of Herero and Nama women, was buried here in Frankfurt. My great-grandfather, Rapote Murangi, had 4 daughters. His first daughter, Yauma Murangi, was raped by General Franke, who's buried here in Hamburg. Rapote himself was killed at Hengari. His wife perished in the desert. They together had 3 daughters. They escaped, did not perish in the desert. but they did not escape the horrors. They were enslaved as essentially as sexual slaves, and 2 of them gave birth to children who were fathered by German soldiers. So that's my connection to the city in more ways than one. That's also part of my heritage, which it's a painful heritage, but it's one that binds us all in so many ways. So I think that's my introduction. I can continue, but I think it's mine to tell you a little bit who I am.
Yes, thank you. I think for the start, this is good. We will be, after the introduction, going into the opening statements, where you will have a few minutes more to elaborate. And then I want to welcome Tania Mancheno, who is a PhD candidate here at the University of Hamburg, and her research subjects and topics that she's been working on are also linked to the questions of post-colonial heritage in Hamburg, which is the task that she has at the university. She's also a former part of the team Hamburg Post-Colonial, and has worked on different things with short movies, but also publications on the topic. And she will be focusing on the spaces or the spatial continuities and focuses of colonialism in Hamburg. And I would also kindly ask you to elaborate a bit more on your introduction. Thanks.
Thank you, Eliza. Thank you very much for being here. Okay, I'm a little nervous because I'm really not a Namibian expert, and it's a high responsibility to be here and to have the opportunity to share some of my hypotheses on my work on space, violence, and post-colonial history or amnesia. Thank you.
Thank you very much. As I said, this was very spontaneous in the change, and obviously we can all feel it, but I would, for the least, but no less, like to welcome you, Mr. Murangi, to the panel, and you are a member of the Ovaherero and Genocide Foundation, and I would like to hear a few words on your personal introduction as well.
Yes, good morning. My name is Mbakumua, as was said. I hail from Namibia, the eastern part of Namibia, the region called Ovaherero. Currently, I am involved in the struggle for restorative justice through the OGF. Besides that, I'm a family man. I'm a farmer. I was forced into buying a commercial farm from a good German friend of mine. So what brought us here today is the quest for that restoration. And I'm happy to be part of the panel and share some of the insights and views that I have on the subject. Can't wait to start.
Yeah, thank you. So I won't let you wait that much. Yes, the first question would be, we're now on the part where the panelists have the chance to take 5 minutes each to give an introduction statement on the topics that we are here to discuss, and the expertise that you brought in. And I'm very pleased that we have very different approaches as well to the topic. So I would like to ask you if you would like to start the introduction.
Thank you once more. I think I'm very glad to be part of this exercise. At a time when I would want to say the city-state of Hamburg has taken the first step in moving from a profiteur of colonialism and genocide to a pioneer, pioneering the role of Germany in ensuring that we realize reparation and recognition for the genocide. In a sense, what we witness today would give us a sense that indeed the city of Hamburg, or the city-state of Hamburg, could slowly be transforming into a sanctuary of our hopes for recognition of genocide and reparation. Now, the topic that we were given forces us to look back at history, because it says we must take a historic time travel to try and understand the colonial experience of Germany, Imperial Germany, and the environment within which it took place. In other words, somehow we are forced to look back and see the context and environment within which, or against which, Germany moved along this path. Implementing a settler colony project, which Germany was looking to do, Imperial Germany was looking to do, in Namibia, came with a number of challenges, some of which was the process of moving people from here, the process of moving all the necessities that people here were used to a country like Namibia, separated from here by the vast Atlantic Ocean and the distance in between. That is what made the location of a city like Hamburg the ideal facility and point from which this project could be implemented. So today, as we are gathered here as victims of this genocide, we are essentially embarking on our modest journey of contribution towards the trajectory of this reparation movement and the cause of the victims that it stands for. We're essentially trying to address a current situation created by German interventions and actions of 114 years ago. Because as human beings, we can never appreciate fully our current situation if we do not look back at the past. Just like we cannot start to fully imagine the challenges of the future without dealing with today's issues. History is full of lessons about human trials and tribulations. And it is such growth that brings us to why Hamburg became what it has become, to our history as victims of genocide of Imperial Germany. Some of the valuable lessons that we can draw from this is, for us, we are embarking on a serious and challenging task of achieving restorative justice. It comes with challenges that are by no measure smaller than what Germany faced when it embarked on her quest people of German descent and citizenry to be relocated to what was then Namibia land and Ovaherero. In that whole exercise, we also get another important history or lesson of history. And it is the whole concept of the interrelatedness and codependence amongst us as human beings in whatever we do. It is something that we as human beings cannot escape, because for there to be a colonizer, there must be a colonized. For there to be an oppressor, there must be an oppressed. Now, this might sound contradictory or not part of what the ideal human situation and environment should be, but that is what we are. That's how we are. Now, as human beings, we have a process through which we interact not only with our past, but also with amongst and within ourselves, which makes us essentially part of a continuum. So that what happened 114 years ago has created a situation for both us in Namibia as victims of that genocide, and for you, Germans in the Federal Republic of Germany, as the descendants of those who perpetrated this amongst us. So we have that relationship directly with the citizens of Germany today. It is not something that we can assign to history and park it and leave it there. That is what puts the responsibility on both of us as victims, and unfortunately in this case, you as the perpetrators. It is part of history. History enjoins us inextricably to our past. And that is a process that fortunately human beings are fully capable of understanding in a manner that no other creature on earth can do. That process of constantly looking back as we evaluate the present, and also looking forward as we contemplate the uncertainty of the future, and we move in our 45 lanes, memory lanes, in trying to chart the trajectory for our future. Now, this interrelatedness amongst us sometimes comes in what appears to be contradictory, as I said earlier. So as we look at Hamburg today as a profiteur of colonialism and the genocide, I said earlier that I think I would not fear contradicting myself if I say, from what I saw yesterday and the pronouncement that came through in the local papers today, Hamburg could now have turned the corner and becoming the pioneer. And it is something that we must, with your help, continue to work on so that it becomes the gateway to our aspirations and hope for restorative justice. What happened from Hamburg? Let's look back at what happened. Essentially, what was hatched here in Hamburg and implemented with a sense of heartlessness in the then Ovaherero and Namibia had negative impacts on the Nama and Ovaherero communities that continues to linger in the Ovaherero and Namibia at all costs. What was hatched here and implemented fully was an idea to disenfranchise the Ovaherero and Nama communities in their own nation states of the day. And finally, what was hashed here and implemented was a plan to wipe out these communities from the face of Mother Namibia, which became apparent was the only way for Germany to achieve her objectives of conquering and seizing land as the people started to resist. Resistance was not born out of arrogance and stubbornness. It is another lesson that we get from history that any person in a privileged position, in a position of privilege, never gives land up without a fight. It was our right and privilege to live freely and safely in Mother Namibia, as it were, in the Ovaherero, in Namibia then. So it was a privilege we had to defend. And that became the reason for what later became a genocide. And I'm saying this with all degrees of comfort because the fact that there was land taken away, the fact that people were killed in a genocidal fashion, are things that we can all bear witness to today, and one cannot fear to say that. It is not someone sitting here and theorizing about what would have happened. It is someone telling the reality of the people that we are seeing here today. When, in the process of defending their privileges and rights, our people took up arms and attacked German settlers. In 1904, initially in Ovaherero, later along the White North River, in the Ovaherero district, in the Sholonipa area. Our Nama communities also decided to resist towards the end of 1904, early 1905. When that happened, and Luedvan realized the limitations of his troops, the city of Hamburg played another crucial role. The preparation and implementation of the total onslaught. It was from here, in the harbor city of Hamburg, that additional troops were shipped to Ovaherero and Namibia. It was from here that horses and camels were shipped, which later became significant weapons of destruction as they were used to pursue our people through the harsh conditions of the Kalahari Desert, to which they were condemned to perish. The question, which was used to contaminate water points, was shipped from here in Hamburg. And finally, and probably one of the things that made Hamburg so connected to this is that the man who carried out these heinous crimes was interned into this city and memorialized through buildings dedicated. And that is why the struggle for restorative justice of our communities cannot escape a direct line back to Hamburg. And that is why the process of German emancipation from this brutal colonial history could not have started at any other place or in any other city than the city-state of Hamburg. Hamburg profiteered, as it were, because like many other big projects being implemented anywhere, and I go to the FIFA World Cup as an example, there are what we call legacy projects that remain after a FIFA World Cup. In Namibia, for example, when the FIFA World Cup went to South Africa, because it was regarded as a project for Africa, we benefited immensely by having some of our soccer fields covered with artificial turfs. A head office for our football body was built. Now the legacy projects in Hamburg, as a facilitator, as a gateway to the then Ovaherero or deutscher Africa, there had to be improvement in infrastructure, roads, rails, warehouses, the harbor being deepened or facilities being added to it, factories to produce the supplies to it, and even institutions. The Colonial Institute was built here to prepare people who were going to the then West Africa. I understand this is what has been turned or part of it into the University of Hamburg or University here in this town. And that is why, in conclusion, I'm saying Hamburg was the gateway to colonialism and genocide in Namibia. Hamburg, 140 years later, is the pioneer of a new chance for Germany to re-engage with Namibia in a much more kinder and human face. I thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Hengari, for the opening statement. And as I believe, partly moving, but also admirable in which very forward way you addressed the responsibilities and the roles that we have, the different roles that we have while being seated here today. And I'm looking forward to be discussing on that, what it could mean, how the trajectories were for Hamburg as a city, and as you put it very nicely, the chance to be a pioneer in the role to take up the responsibility for the past and for the genocide could be elaborated on later. Now I would be looking forward to be hearing from you, Mrs. Mancheno, on also the opening statement and the question in which ways Hamburg was implemented and profited from the genocide, particularly committed in today's Namibia. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you also for mentioning already so many aspects that make of our city what it is in relation to Namibia. So we have heard that Baden-Hafen was a central place for the violent entanglements of both countries. But I'm not a historian, unfortunately. My colleague, who is a historian and who has years and names with him, he is sick. So what I will be doing is to tell you a little bit from my political scientist perspective, what does it mean, these entanglements, and why it is so difficult to think them as such. So, first of all, he mentioned, and of course, one of the central concepts in which we deal nowadays is recognition. And this word recognition implies another word, right? Cognition. And important, first of all, to notice that almost everybody in Namibia knows where Hamburg is and knows that Berlin is the capital of Germany. And on the other hand, in Germany, almost nobody knows that Windhoek is the capital of Namibia. So I do this exercise a lot with my students here at the university, also in geography, students for geography, and I ask them, so where's Windhoek? And they are really uncomfortable, and it's like, it sounds German, it sounds familiar, but they don't know where it is. And of course it becomes even more difficult if I ask them where's Luderitz, for example. And but people in Namibia know where Hamburg is, and that is a huge difference that we have to acknowledge, to know before we can start talking about recognition. So there has to be a transfer of knowledge from Namibia to Germany. And this transfer has also been for me yesterday an incredible opportunity to see once again from the experience, from the Namibian experience, and the fact that you are here as a delegation coming from a former colonial country. For me, it has been a lesson of dignity. So thank you very much for that. I mean, some German people and professors have told you during these days, oh, the city is making pretty for you, as in the Dovrawek Kaserne in Jenfeld, where one of the murders of the Nama and Herero people are being celebrated still. So the city makes itself nice for you, and I think that is a huge step which you have managed to put into place, and that is wonderful. I mean, I don't know any other delegation which go to a European country and the people in the city or the country get nervous and they start cleaning up, right? So that is on you, and thank you for that lesson and dignity. And to close up, a third reflection to invite you to think a little bit more also in the implications, because also pretty often in Germany we forget that when we talk about colonial history, it's the history of violence, it's the history of dispossession, it's the history of resistance, and resistance which are articulated in colonial and non-colonial languages. But space is one of those languages, I believe, and there are a lot of histories and narratives which are told by cartographies. And if you look at the time in which Hamburg built the warehouse, also die Speicherstadt, at the end of the 19th century, yes, you see the city reinvents itself. So there is not any information about who built that place, but we know that it was built within 5 years. Okay? Not even the Elbphilharmonie, so the new music house has been built in that time. But you can imagine what was for an infrastructure project. And people at that time living there, we have, together with my colleagues, we have done some research, and we have found out that there were rich people and also poor people in Hamburg living next to the harbor who were displaced actually, okay, to build that. And we live in a city in which the center of the city is not big for people, but for goods. But for goods coming from the colonies, which was actually already planned in the future. So you have to imagine what a national project, what a project of national imagination was created in that moment, because they didn't know that it will be full, but they were planning to get those those warehouses full from products. At the same time, you look at the history of Namibia, and you will tell me much more, I'm sure, but the less I have found out is that in the region of the harbor also, in Namibia, where Germans were occupying, they made a Sperrgebiet, so a zone of restricted access for local people. So there was again this violence of this possession of displacing people and of determining spaces just for business, just for capital. So it was a project with, I mean, the Speicherstadt should be thought in that relation, in the history of both harbors of Germany and Namibia. Yeah, thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. Also, I'm very much looking forward to discuss with the other panelists on those questions. And now, lastly, for the opening statement, I would like to ask you, Dr. Murangi, to elaborate on your perspective on the opening question for the panel.
Can you hear me? Okay. So I told you a little bit about my great-great-grandfather, that he was killed in 1904, and I'm going to kind of speed forward and see how things look like to our children. My youngest daughter, Nyande, she's a 7th grader, and as part of a history class, they did a project. Some students wrote about slavery, the Holocaust, any number of topics, and she chose to write a paper on the link between the Herero genocide and the Holocaust. And we were, her mom and I, we were very careful to say, you don't really have to do this this topic, sweetie. And but she wanted to do this project. She did a paper, and then there was a National History Day where do a documentary or an exhibit, and she decided to do an exhibit based on the paper, and she did that, the exhibit, in collaboration with a colleague, one of her classmates. The theme of the paper or the exhibit was conflict and compromise, and as she discussed with there were a panel of judges, and she was saying, well, in the case of the Holocaust, you can see there was some measure of closure, justice, if you can say that, because there was an apology, there were reparations, and now there's ongoing conversation and memorialization of those horrors. It's part of current discourse. And then she said, well, then let's take in terms of the Herero genocide. There was indeed the conflict, the wars, and the killing, but the compromise along this theme is not there. And then she says, and I'm going to quote here, in a way, the Herero genocide has not ended because Germany has not yet apologized and paid reparations, end of quote. We had not talked around this issue in this manner, but this 12-year-old arrived at this conclusion herself. I think there are lessons that we could perhaps borrow from this as we explore how we move forward in terms of the value of education. You put the evidence, you put the information in front of these young people from all walks of life, they'll tell you, really, this genocide is still ongoing. Will you share this is the exhibit that she produced and shared. So I say Nyande is right, because the harm done continues to affect us and to undermine our viability as a people, as communities. The ramifications have continued unabated, and we are constantly reminded of this horrible event. Thousands of our people still live in exile as a result of genocidal replacement. They have lost language, culture, and are marginalized politically, economically, and culturally. The land the Germans stole has not been returned. Instead, our people are confined to barren, overcrowded, waterless, unstable, and economically non-viable reservations. The remains of our ancestors that the Germans stole and shipped to Germany and other places, including the United States of America, they continue to linger nameless in these cold, inhumane places. And thousands continue to struggle with transnational trauma from the unspeakable cruelty and brutality, slave labor, and genocidal rape. And Nyande is right, and as the late Paramount Chief Kwaima used to say, if you deny genocide, you are perpetuating genocide. And we know that we have lived with constant denial of the genocide. Even to this day, we hear that Germany has recognized. I cannot, in full honesty, tell my mom that, yes, Mom, Germany has acknowledged the genocide. Because, and as we are seeing a little bit now, it's even though, the Speaker of the Parliament and others have spoken about that, yes, those events are genocide, and they use this language within the communications. There's no formal acknowledgement of this event. So Nyande is right, because Germany has not formally apologized, has not offered, has not been held accountable or hold anyone accountable for these crimes, and has not made restitutions to begin to provide some measure of justice. I'm going to go back to home, and as I'm talking to my kids and my family and our community that's based in the US, I'm going to tell them a little bit about this experience of this couple of weeks, couple of days. It feels like a couple of weeks. And there's so many takeaway. I'm actually thinking maybe this is the last couple of days have been historic in many ways. A couple of days ago, we had a very dignified occasion, sad occasion, where we saw and visited the remains of one Herero ancestor who is in the possession of the Hamburg University Medical Center. The dean of the medical center He spoke to us genuinely and sincerely and expressed remorse for the fact that the university is in possession of these human remains, and that, in fact, human remains don't have any place in museums or archives or any other place. He apologized sincerely, not just on his behalf, but his faculty. That was unexpected, but it was profound and confirmed our common humanity and indeed our destiny. So the last couple of days have been truly historic in a way, because the Minister of Culture for the city-state of Hamburg invited the descendants of the Ovaherero and Nama genocides to Parliament, and directly and sincerely spoke to them and apologized on behalf of the city-state of Hamburg. Again, another profound moment confirming our humanity and our destiny. This is hope. This is a message. This is a building block. This is something that I will take back to my daughter, Nyande, and the broader community. As my sister Ushiwa Munyangwe said yesterday, perhaps the German federal government could get some inspirations or maybe borrow a leaf from the city of Hamburg in terms of what they need to do to move forward. Which is, after years of denial, obfuscating, and minimizing our suffering, Germany, the federal government, needs to offer a clear apology, a clear statement by the Bundestag and the federal government acknowledging the genocides and accepting full responsibility for all atrocities committed in Germany's name. And part of the reason for why that's important, that is, it's a clear statement by the Bundestag, is because, as we have seen perhaps over the last couple of months and years, when the conversation gets a little bit more difficult to Germany's liking, they start to vacillate a little bit. That maybe it's not, those were actually atrocities. When the speaker, Ahmed, talks about genocide, and then the ambassador of Germany to Namibia, Schwarze, talks about those atrocities, suggests that unless you have something that's as firm and a commitment by the Bundestag, it's also something that in theory could be withdrawn. So, having finally publicly acknowledged the genocides, the German federal government should apologize directly to the victims of the genocides and their descendants and ask for forgiveness. I was surprised to hear a story that I read somewhere that, the leader of Germany is prepared to apologize to essentially the president of Namibia. I didn't quite understand that, because I mean, genocide is so profoundly personal, right? Apologize directly to the people that were affected, that you want to ask for forgiveness. And then I was thinking that, and perhaps just as General von Trotter's extermination order, it was translated in Ovaherero and put around the necks of old men and other people, just in case the message didn't get through, in case you couldn't understand German. That order was translated in Ovaherero. Perhaps it's proper, too, that the apology is translated and delivered in Ovaherero and Nama. It should speak directly to the people and their suffering, and it should include essentially an accounting. What are we apologizing for? What have we done? Do we understand that this is what we have done to you, these are the consequences, and for that, we are sorry. For example, the apology must acknowledge and account for the legacy of genocidal rape and its lasting effects on multiple generations of Ovaherero and Nama women. And I'm going to digress a little bit on this issue of rape. We know that the rape of Ovaherero and Nama women started way before 1904, and in fact was one of many grievances that our people had against German soldiers and agents in Namibia. The rape continued with total abandon during the genocide years as German soldiers took advantage of defenseless women and young girls in concentration camps. The rape of Herero and Nama women and girls continued after the camps were closed and young girls were assigned to work as sex slaves for German settlers and agents. And because there were no protections for these women and no laws to punish the rapists, generations of German soldiers and agents continued to prey on Herero girls and women long after 1904. In fact, my friend Yefta Nguheri-Mo's grandmother, this is a story that he has told me, that his grandmother told him of a German guy who long after the war had ended would prey on pregnant Herero women and would rape them and cut their bellies open. The rape of Ovaherero and Nama women resulted in numerous children being born of mixed race parents. These children of rape and their descendants have a German heritage. As painful as that is to accept, it is the reality. By not acknowledging this, Germany is in essence continuing a racist ideology, mentality, that perhaps in 1906 led to what we call the anti-miscegenation laws, the forced sterilization of Herero women, and in some instances, the killing of children born of rape in Namibia. It is also the same ideology which created the Nuremberg laws, where Jews could not marry non-Jews, this idea of an Aryan race. And also the same ideology that led to the forced sterilization of children of mixed German and African parents, the so-called Reinhard bastards. This aspect has not been acknowledged, has not been discussed, and for years, the German government has continued to protect and support German-speaking Namibians, those who are what they call Germans, right? Offering them material and moral support, including citizenship, while ignoring the descendants of the victims of rape. This is not back then, this is today. Is that who Germany is today? Should perhaps the descendants of these children have this access to the same opportunities and rights, including German citizenship? I'm just wondering, and maybe we should ask the policymakers or whoever, what is the moral of that story, and is that who Germany is today? I can end here, my sister, for now.
Yes, thank you very much. I feel like we have now from all of you three heard the very vast and broad implementations that Hamburg, or the look at Hamburg as a post-colonial city has up to now, and especially very moving and deeply personal reports also of what it means for the people and the descendants of those who have suffered the colonial violence. And I would like to first enter into the point that you all three mentioned, which is on the one hand recognition and then also restoration, but on the other hand the colonial violence that hasn't been addressed. And therefore I would like for you to discuss with each other the question of how, which could be ways to have the exchange, as you Tania Mancheno put it very well, in the ways that Germans still need to learn from Namibians, in the sense that we can't say that the cognition, the point of understanding what not just the violence was, but also what the profits were, is. So I would like to invite you to get into a talk with each other on the point of recognition and cognition on the part of the German state, particularly Hamburg as a city and its citizens. Thank you. And who wants to, if there is anyone to start, just give me a sign. Yeah.
Let me try. I think having painted the picture, the question that begs is, what can the city-state of Hamburg and its citizens do to achieve or help achieve restorative justice that we are seeking as victims? And one can just start by saying, look, what we have witnessed over the last 3 days or so appears to be a good start in terms of a consensus that appears to be emerging amongst, most importantly, the officialdom in the city-state. The significance of us being in the Rathaus, in the Kaiser Wilhelm Saal, as it were, which apparently is one of those revered places reserved only for significant events. Ours hosting in that is one step that the city has taken, but it is not enough. It is not enough. It's a giant leap in terms of where we were on Wednesday morning when we landed here, because as we are leaving the city now, tomorrow and Monday or so, this is the story that we are going to tell. But we must leave the army of the converts, particularly the civic society and the young people of Germany and Hamburg as a city-state, that this is just the beginning. We stand ready and want to see a much more engaging hand-holding exercise as we take jointly our message of hope for restoration and reparation of our people, our message and hope for what I am terming the salvation of Germany from her past. We need to have a comprehensive strategy jointly, which would take the sense that is emerging here across the borders of these city-states into the other neighboring and those beyond republics of the Federal Republic of Germany. The ultimate aim being getting it right into Berlin, into the Bundestag. That is when we would say, indeed, Hamburg became the gateway and the sanctuary of our hopes for a dignified healing process as victims of the genocide. I think, in my way of understanding what you were trying to drive us at, I would say that for now.
Thank you. Thank you, Mbakumua. You are always giving me the bridge to continue. The thinking bridge. Okay. Yes. What could this city do? And because you Eliza, you told you went back to the fact that I said, okay, we have to start thinking or learning from the South. There's a lot of things actually that we can learn from Namibia nowadays. The city has made itself so difficult, not only the city but the whole country, to say, no, we cannot change names. It's not possible. It's like this, and it always be like that. Although, of course, this country has a history of renaming things after the Holocaust, for example. But that is an argument which is always coming back. No, names are like monuments, you cannot change them. And actually, in Namibia, there's in Windhoek, there has not only been, if I'm correctly informed, not only been a change of the monuments, for example, of colonial German soldiers, which were at the center of the city, and they have been put in another place. So it's not an erasing of history, but it's a decolonialization of the public space to tell other stories. And it's also the case of a huge, a whole city. So I mentioned the colonial name, Luderitz, but it's actually have been renamed too. And I will try to pronounce it. Naminos, yeah? So. Yeah, so perhaps that to acknowledge that spaces can change the narrative they tell, and acknowledge that we are used to think about the colonial actors being white male, who have a name and a last name, and the resistance are always collective and nameless. And it's not like that. It's not like that. We have people who inspired us among borders. I want to tell her last name, not just her for example, Esther Munyanye. Thank you very much.
Just to add, and I'll build on a little bit on the theme of education. I think we all are in agreement that education and public awareness is important, not only here in Germany, but also in Namibia. Some of the lessons I'm taking from Hamburg actually around the work that Hamburg Post-Colonial has done and Berlin Post-Colonial has done in terms of their efforts to decolonize spaces, public spaces. Some of that is actually needed a lot in Namibia. One of the, you had these rapists that were not really, who were punished, people who committed huge atrocities that were not punished, and they cannot be punished nowadays. But at least we are not glorifying them, and we are putting their stories in perspective. Visiting the Trotter House and actually seeing that that caption there, really putting his whole history in context is significant. So that's a lesson we will take from Hamburg in terms of what our brothers and sisters have been doing here. We also, some of the work that's happening at the research center, where there are these artists who are looking at thousands and thousands of pictures from the genocide, and using that to engage the public and others to reflect, to open up and share their perspectives about these events and what it means. So in terms, as we think about, okay, how do we inform the broader public? How do we work to incorporate the teaching of the Ovaherero and Nama genocides in public school education? There's a great deal of work that's happening, and these are some examples that one can build on. After we visited our ancestor that's at the Hamburg Medical Center, we had a tour of essentially the archive or library, and where the professor really took us through. It was essentially the intersection of medicine and ethics, and I think it's so powerful. You could see how technology was used one way to help humanity, and then in the same way, perhaps several decades later, to cause great harm. How the National Socialist Party, the Nazis, conducted human experiments and that surveillance towards some great evil. With sort of an education perspective, I'm thinking, this is a concept that you could use in any parts of the world to engage students. And of course, I think as we saw with the example here of Nyande, just let the kids investigate. So the link between the Herero and Nama genocides and the Holocaust, that's another avenue. But so we visited the ethnological center, and we saw thousands of pictures, but we also learned that there are 1,700 objects from Namibia. And we started to have conversations, when can we get this back? Are there others somewhere here in Germany, in other places? How do we find that out? Can you help us find that out? So maybe one, but then one thinks, well, actually, yeah, but where are we going to put them back in Namibia? So we have, right now we do not have either a museum or center dedicated to the Ovaherero and Nama genocides. 28 years after independence. We don't even have a day that's dedicated to commemorating the victims of those genocides. That's a national disgrace. But perhaps Hamburg has an opportunity right now to help us establish the first museum education center in Namibia that's dedicated to the memories of those victims, a place where we can very quickly return these 1,700 objects and other objects, including perhaps a place where we can, I don't know what the right word, return the human remains that are scattered all over the world that right now do not have a place, a final resting place. Now, I'm not suggesting that the center museum will be the final resting place, but at least it will be in Namibia, and it will be a dignified space. Maybe we can challenge ourselves. Maybe this is an opportunity that Hamburg could take.
Would you like to add something? Or no? Okay, thank you very much also for this. I feel humble in the face of which you all stressed the shared responsibility that we have in the process of decolonialization and remembrance and restoration of justice. And at the same time, I can see you, the delegation, you, the speakers who came here, who came to the ground of the perpetrators who are now speaking, sharing the room with the descendants of those people, have made many steps in advance, as you mentioned it, and towards the people in Germany. And in the face of that, I feel like the question of the pioneer role you all mentioned that Hamburg could take, you also spoke about the challenges linked to it, especially you, Mr. Hengari, mentioned it in the beginning that there are many challenges, and I would like to know from you, what do you think where those challenges lie in particular in the context of Hamburg and Namibia? It's shared past and continuity today.
Yes. Some of the challenges that I see from our side, or let me start from this side, is the development of a consensus. A significant challenge would be to develop a consensus around the shared responsibilities in your process of decolonizing Hamburg, the city-state, in your process of assuming a role, an enabling role for us to realize our restorative justice, there must be a political consensus reached here in the city-state. Because without that, it will become difficult. You can do certain things, but certain things would become impossible. Secondly, it is also to help facilitate a national consensus or an environment of open dialogue within the Federal Republic. Because I believe as much as republics are free or have a leeway in certain things, there are areas, particularly the areas, I believe, of foreign relations or interacting with sovereigns or people outside your republic, which becomes the domain of the federal system. So I think those are some of the challenges. Consensus building here, locally, and then openness and dialogue and consensus finally at the federal level. Those would be the challenges. The challenges from our side, as he said, are some of the obvious things. If my understanding was correct, when we were at the place where we viewed that remain, there was willingness, if it was not for the logistics and the relationships that I said, that when certain things start to happen across borders, other offices within the federal government have to be taken into account. We have, as Kavemuii said, no facilities of our own. Today, we don't even have, I can say, a national consensus in Namibia on the whole question of genocide, how it should be approached, what should be done nationally, and that is where you see today we are operating at cross purposes. Ourselves as victims and our sovereign, the government. So those are challenges that we have, and it's a process that on both sides of the Atlantic, we would have to dig deep and see how we can come to those consensuses. But I'm hopeful, because there is no human condition that is unnatural, that can endure beyond reasonable attempts of those that are entrapped in it. And I think what we have done, what we are doing, have done over the last 10, 15 years has been sufficient, and that is why we are starting to see some of the signs that we are seeing here as a response to those actions. But there are those challenges. They are not insurmountable in any way, but we better advise to take them into account as to try and deal with them.
Yes, the last 15 years have surely been really crucial in terms of negotiations and finding the spaces and the times to negotiate, but nonetheless is of course a history which goes 100 years before. We cannot forget that the genocide took place as a response to the resistance against German occupation. And before that, of course, a history of colonial resistance which goes 500 years ago. So I think to sum up, you mentioned also the difficulties which I also see in Namibia, who is seen as the actors in the faculty of negotiating the state, and then the local communities are just once again silenced. So the question, and to link with you too, because you mentioned this really important questions about citizenship. So who is actually the national subject, and who is representing the national body? That would be questions which we need to address in both countries, I would say. And in my opinion, it's because the nation actually is built upon a colonial legacy, which is always forgotten. But yeah, in a sense, if we address the question also of the missing subject, the missing citizen nowadays in our cities, with racialized violence and etc., we do see parallels, and we see how to understand racism as a sickness which has started in colonial times, and that also changed the perspective, actually, how we talk about, with white people basically, about colonialism. It's not about, or post-colonial and decolonial claims are not principally about privilege. It's about access to earth, it's about access to land, it's about dignity, and that we have to keep in mind, yeah, in both countries, I suppose. And beyond, of course, beyond.
So just kind of, as we talk to our colleagues who are here, we have known for many years, asking, so how has the discourse changed here in Germany? And almost to a T, all of them are telling us that there's a greater awareness of this issue publicly. So some of those barriers are being broken. But I also just want to echo this discussion we're having here, that we have to kind of break this narrative that reparations and negotiations and apology is about governments dealing with each other. And I'm often surprised that we do not have greater engagement with foundations here and institutions, NGOs from Germany that are dealing directly with these communities, regardless of what the governments have done. In fact, in many ways, the Namibian government has become sort of the gatekeeper, filtering what comes in. And so I think and it's, so part of reparations and remembrance, it's engaging with each other, individuals to individuals, institutions. It's not a government control event. So I think that's my contribution, is that I think we have to and this also applies to us as, okay, to us as Ovaherero and Nama. Let's find ways to deal directly with our brothers and sisters and institutions, and not depend on the governments, which we have, and this is partly why we are here, because there are so-called negotiations that about us, but do not include us, which in essence are against us.
Yes, thank you very much again. As we started late and we're now proceeded in the time, I would like to open for a few questions. Unfortunately, I can't open for everybody who is, I'm sure, having many questions that they would like to ask the panelists, but I would like to collect them first, and then you can see who feels like answering. And in the end, you will all three have a short moment for last words. And I think, I'm not sure if you're preparing to say something, Josie, but no? You wanted to say something? No. Okay, just for the question. Okay, I saw a hand over there. Thank you. Yeah, I will collect them.
Thank you very much for the three presenters. Mine is not a question, but I just want to underline what Mbakumua said, that back home in Namibia, it seems like we have a serious challenge of reaching consensus on the whole issue of genocide as well as decolonization. We see what Berlin post-colonial is doing, the renaming of streets and so on. I just want to share with the House that while we are struggling with the issue of genocide, reparation, decolonization, and so on, you would be surprised that still today, we have a street in Namibia called Straße. Can you believe it? There was a petition to the municipality of that specific city in Namibia to remove that street and to rename it. But it was, you know, the government, and that is the municipality is a substructure of the government, resisted for the renaming of that street. So that means that somehow, during the night, we need to go and remove the street name. Because when you want to negotiate with government, it's not accepting, it's not receptive. So those are some of the challenges that we have back home. And we really do appreciate what the civil societies in Berlin and Hamburg are trying to do. That is just something that I wanted to share. We even have the Bismarckstraße, Slaughterstraße, they are still in Namibia.
Yes. Yes, thank you very much for this comment. You are very right. As the ground that you described in Namibia, we also face it here. And you, as you might have walked around the city, have found many places in Hamburg as well that are still there, unfortunately. Bismarck, who is, has a monument looking at the gate to Hamburg, the literal gate to Hamburg, the harbor, is still here. Streets are here, colonial shops are here. So this is also a shared, but obviously differently heavy continuity that we have. Are there any other questions here? Yeah.
Good day, everyone. Distinguished panel and brothers and sisters who are so bravely opening your history to the world. I want to challenge Hamburg and what was suggested yesterday, that we come to this conference and it would just feel great to have even one solution or potential steps towards helping you achieve your goals. I would like to commemorate also what has already been said, the organization of this wonderful conference. It's been amazing. So I hope and pray that this is an okay place for me to express myself, because Brother Kavemuii, I almost got it right. He just said, I took it as a potential reparation, that Hamburg, Germany, the powers that need to apologize and get into motion of reparations to build or help Namibia build a commemoration, whether it's a center or a museum. This coordinates with something that Hamburg has tried to do. Millicent Ajay is also a witness of that, for the last 100 years we've been trying, this is to my knowledge, to erect a physical place where people of African origin can go to fellowship, to show their artwork, to show their performances, to have lectures or whatever. And this is again in motion. So I would strongly suggest, with your suggestion, that we parallel with the reparations as a segue, a negotiation in between. If you could trust us, Namibian folk, if you can trust the Hamburg Black organizations with the German organizations to parallel work on erecting this place. And the first wing of the International Cultural Center to dedicate it to Namibia and your history. And then we have a lot of Ghanaians, of course, and it goes on. There's a lot of cultures from the African motherland. And we can start to build this as a potential reparation, using the monies from the German government, and whether it's private money, who cares? As long as we show a real physical result of the apology, that in Hamburg to erect a place where people of African origin can come, and then the world can see that Hamburg and Germany have actually manifested what you have said so eloquently, to change the door of destruction to a door of salvation and reparation. So Ruben, your team, Tom, the Black community, ESD, whatever organizations are involved in this process, let's parallel with Namibia build 2 monuments in the form of a building that commemorates and recognizes past, present, and future African involvement in our world to make our planet a better place. Thank you for your time.
Yes, thank you very much for sharing ideas and very specific steps that each and every one of us could take. I would ask again if there are any questions left that you would like to ask to the panelists. Not sure. One here.
Yeah, thank you. I just want to add to what Mbakumua and Kavemuii saying, that as an educator and activist, I do believe that there is something that you can do as citizens here of Hamburg. Reconciliation is a process, and we don't have to wait for the German government to apologize or to start the motion of reconciliation. But there are steps you can take. We have Ovaherero and Nama students in Namibia who are finishing high school or who are in high school. You can create a project or relationship where you can bring these kids and finish their high schools, or even exchange programs so that you can create a dialogue. So in a way, you are creating a relationship between young people from Namibia or those descendants to come here and even finish their high schools, because you do the same with the German Namibians in Namibia. You bring them over here. So that is something that you can do as a citizen. At the same time, you can even, as a university students, ask for a university to open up to scholarship from our students to come and study here while we, as a part of the reconciliation process. I don't think it's going to cost a lot of money for this city-state that is so rich. I mean, you are building this high-rise building that nobody can afford to live in, but some people are affording to live in. the big hall that you built that is cost you $7 billion. So there are steps you can take. You can ask the city government to do something to create an exchange program. I think you can even start next year. Finally, the Namibian Herero Nama genocide is a tragedy. It's the African tragedy, it's the oppressed people's tragedy, and it's also a European tragedy. So we are asking you to connect your struggles that you have and make the genocide issue part of your struggles. We are not saying abandon what you're doing as an activist, but connect our issue to your struggle because they are all intertwined. So finally, you ask your government, I mean, what I'm saying, the African tragedy is like funny that you have to apply for a visa as in Herero and Nama to come to Germany, even denied for you, but the wealth of our people are here. That is injustice. Why does it have to take years and denial of visa just to visit Germany? Because it doesn't make sense. As he said, they are products of rapes from German soldiers and German colonial past. So they should have free access to this, to betterment of their own society, and as part of the reconciliation process as well.
Thank you. If there is, I would like to leave the floor for the last question before we get to the closing quick statements of the panelists. No questions? Sure. Okay. Yeah, then I would give the floor to you again to take a minute or two to have a closing statement, in the sense that you can leave in the room what you would like to share with everybody for the end before we then go into the break. Thank you. Is there anyone who would like to start? Yes.
I think maybe in closing, so reparations have got many dimensions, and we heard yesterday about the Ovaherero and Nama people who are in diaspora who have been displaced. Perhaps, I think one of my brother was saying that perhaps half the Ovaherero people are either in South Africa or Botswana, and perhaps the ones that are there are as many as the ones that are in Namibia. Our people have been displaced. Some of those are choosing to stay there. Others want to go back to Namibia. And maybe this is a point to the Namibian government. I've read that there are about 900 families who have registered with the embassies in Namibia and Germany, in Namibia and Botswana. I would suggest to the Namibian government that these families are repatriated, but not to the overcrowded reservations or to the sort of distant, far away, the same areas where we were pushed and designated to live, like even GAM and ASEP, as was done in the previous repatriations. I would suggest to our Namibian government that these families are repatriated to the homeland, to the ancestral land in central and southern Namibia. And that those who do not wish to be farmers, that they are resettled in cities like Windhoek. That would not be such a bad idea. So I cannot express enough my gratitude to the conference organizers for having us here, to the city of Hamburg for the welcome, for the engagement. To all of you, thank you. Thank you so much.
To close up, I would like to remember then when you look at a map, a world map of Africa, before colonialization, you can read how big the Ovaherero territory was, and it was just so big. And now you talk about diasporic expressions in which people try to go back. So it's a tragical story of dispossession, of land dispossession, and we need to think and hear more about the landscapes of memory we tell. That's what I want to say. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you once more. I think the colleague touched on a very essential issue of land in the context of Namibians who or descendants of this war of genocide find themselves when they get back to Namibia. There is a settlement created outside what would have been a normal, nomadic farming communities settlement. Gum and ASAP, thick Kalahari sand without water. There is a process in Namibia of land reform run and implemented by a Department of State, a ministry, which buys commercial farms and cuts them up into non-economic units and give them to people to farm on. There is a process of destruction of commercial farming units and turning them into units, as I said, that are not commercially viable to farm on. As a commercial farmer myself, living next to neighbors who have been farming on land that they got and inherited as third-generation farmers today. I am a first-generation farmer. And the experience of those who have farmed for that long is that in your Mahege region, for example, an economic viable unit has to be minimum 7,000 hectares. That's because of the low rainfall and the type of grazing that one can get and the encroachment of invader bushes. Not only that, we have had a process through land reform, which I think my colleague would have spoken to today, Schwarze, if he was here, where this land, when acquired by the state or government, is used to resettle predominantly people who did not lose land, who get drawn from their traditional areas, which were hardly, if at all, affected by the colonial process of Germany. We now also have had a problem with some of the farmers like myself who had bought farms and are now facing difficulties to pay off those farms because they are expected to pay interest rates on land. Land, the base of any wealth in any nation. Land, the basis on which one can start to address poverty. It's becoming a very scarce commodity, particularly to the victims of genocide. Now, those are some of the areas in which we would be looking to see and explore all the people in Germany, medium to long term. But I think of significance at the moment is we don't have something that in Namibia memorializes our genocide and the legacy that it has left on us. That's why I want to link to what my sister there was saying. It is probably more important for us in Namibia to have something like that, a memorial for the genocides of the Nama and the Hereros in Windhoek, somewhere on private land to be acquired by donations and funds from the Federal Republic of Germany, the city-state of Hamburg, where we can erect a structure that memorializes and houses some of the artifacts and documentations of our people that are here. I think that is something that we can do. I don't think the city-state of Hamburg would need federal government permission to fund such a project. As a starting point, we have already, and I want to echo and add my words to those who have facilitated this platform for us today and the workshop over the last 4 days. The struggle, you have now committed yourself to a process. We have started this, and you set the standard of your commitment and involvement so high that from now on we would demand more and more from you. And that is why I'm closing with, it was going to become more difficult for us to sustain. It was easier to get in there. The standard that we have, now we must sustain it. I thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. I have nothing to add besides my utmost respect and admiration for you being present, for you sharing and giving the opportunity for everybody in this room to learn from you. And I would like to invite everybody to take a moment to think for themselves what are the actions that they can take, maybe to inform themselves on the infos that we didn't get from the panelists who weren't here today, but who are available for those who don't know them yet. Maybe for you to find ways to heal with dignity, and maybe for the university to ask itself the questions which responsibility it can take also towards the politics of Hamburg, of Germany. Thank you so very much.